Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching Today I Found Out, and in today's video we're looking at the curious case of Pablo EskoBear, also known as the Cocaine Bear. On September the 11th, 1985, an elderly Kentucky man named Fred Myers awoke to find a dead man lying on his driveway. If this was not odd enough, the deceased individual was wearing a bulletproof vest. And if that wasn't unusual enough, he was also wearing Gucci loafers, night vision goggles, a large satchel, and a parachute. When the police arrived and investigated further, they found that he also had on his person 2 handguns, a couple of knives, $4,500 in cash, as well as some ropes and some food. So with all of this weird equipment found on him, you might now be wondering, well, what was in the satchel? And it's not going to disappoint, because that was $15 million of cocaine. The police then surmised that the man had leapt from a plane and died due to his parachute failing. Indeed, it was also later noted by friends of the man in question that he had a propensity to push the envelope on how late he could open his parachute, so it's also possible that in the darkness he simply waited too long to deploy it. Well, this man, he was later identified as Andrew C. Thornton II. He was a child of wealth turned paratrooper in the 101st Airborne Division. He later became a narcotics officer and later again a lawyer, but once again he decided to change careers and this time went with something completely different. He decided to become a drug lord. Indeed, he became one of the heads of a drug smuggling ring in Kentucky, simply known as The Company. But today, we're not going to be talking about Thornton's exceptionally colourful life. Indeed, the subject of today's video is an unlikely victim of Thornton's last adventure, a large black bear, now known colloquially as Pablo EskoBear, or simply the Cocaine Bear. Well, about 3 months after Thornton's unfortunate demise, Cocaine Bear was discovered dead in the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia. This is the same forest where Thornton's plane, a Cessna 404 which had put the autopilot on and leapt out of, had crashed. The 175-pound black bear was found surrounded by 40 empty packages that had been torn open, all of which contained traces of cocaine. Putting 2 and 2 together, investigators reasoned that the packages had likely originally been full of cocaine before the bear got to them. They further surmised that Thornton must have decided to drop the packages from the plane owing to already being heavily loaded down with near 80 pounds of cocaine that he'd be carrying when he jumped. Presumably, he intended to go and retrieve those packages once he was safely on the ground. However, even if he had survived the jump, he would have found that the bear in question had eaten the contents of all 40 containers. To confirm this is actually what happened to the bear, its body was packed up and sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, where it was cut open and its stomach was examined. The medical examiner who performed the procedure would later note of his findings, "Its stomach was literally packed to the brim with cocaine. There isn't a mammal on the planet that could survive that. Cerebral hemorrhaging, respiratory failure, hypothermia, renal failure, heart failure, stroke, you name it, that bear had it." News of the bear's unusual fate was reported upon by papers across the country, and it quickly became enshrined as part of the legend surrounding Thornton that had come up in Kentucky. Indeed, this tale today is known there as the Bluegrass Conspiracy. Cocaine Bear himself was playfully nicknamed Pablo EskoBear, after notorious drug lord Pablo EskoBear, who at his cartel's peak is estimated to have supplied upwards of 80% of the cocaine into the United States. If you somehow haven't seen Narcos on Netflix, well, that's a business of about $26 billion a year, which is about $48 billion today when you consider inflation. Now, this might have been the end for Cocaine Bear. He could have just become a little footnote in history, but there was an entity called Kentucky for Kentucky, and in 2015, they decided that the bear was a part of the state's cherished history, and they endeavored to track down what had happened to his body. What they discovered was that after overdosing on enough cocaine to kill an elephant, Pablo EskoBear went on quite the adventure. They found that the aforementioned medical examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation opted to gift the body to an unnamed friend who was a taxidermist on the side. Well, this friend, once he got the bear, he had it stuffed, and then he gave it away to the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area. They put it on display in their visitor center. Now, unfortunately for them, a forest fire in the early 1990s prompted staff to temporarily relocate Cocaine Bear to a storage facility in Dalton for his own safety. However, he was only in storage for a month before someone decided to steal his body and sell it to a pawn shop. And then, apparently in a story that didn't already have enough twists, the bear was then sold to country musician Waylon Jennings, who in turn then gave it to a friend who lived in Las Vegas, one Ron Thompson, a man who was known for helping the wealthy have a good time while in Sin City. Thompson, who funnily enough is rumored to have been an associate of Andrew Thornton during his drug running days, then put the bear on display in his giant mansion until 2009 when he passed away. So we could even say that even in death, Cocaine Bear knew how to party, spending about a decade living in an obscenely large Vegas mansion owned by a man who made a living satisfying the vices of the rich and famous who came to town. But this is not the end of Cocaine Bear's story. After Thompson died, he, along with most of Thompson's other possessions, they went up for auction. So at this auction, now we must ask, well, who bought Cocaine Bear? Well, according to a manifest from the auction house, an elderly Chinese man purchased him for the princely sum of $200. This man, Zhu Tang, then put the bear on display in his traditional Chinese merchant shop because his wife said she didn't want it around the house. Indeed, we actually have a quote from his wife here: "I wouldn't have it, it scared me, I made him take it to the store." Now, a bit more information from Tang's wife here says that her husband was always buying random stuff that she really didn't like, but he had a particular fondness for that bear. All of that being said, in 2012, when Tang died, his wife, despite selling off the business, actually kept the bear for reasons that are not publicly known. So now we come back to Kentucky for Kentucky, who managed to track the bear down and informed her of its storied history and place among the pantheon of Kentucky folk heroes. Now, at this point, Mrs. Tang simply told them that they could have the animal for the cost of shipping because she just wanted it out of the house. Kentucky for Kentucky accepted her offer, and this put an end to Cocaine Bear's adventures. So while now you might be wondering, well, what is Cocaine Bear up to today? Well, he's the chief attraction in Kentucky for Kentucky's Fun Mall and can be found wearing a fetching trucker cap and a small sign around his neck featuring a brief recap of his story, as well as a stark warning that states, "Don't do drugs or you'll end up dead and maybe stuffed like poor Cocaine Bear." Seems likely. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to subscribe and check out some other videos from the archives over there on the right. And as always, thanks for watching.